Hello, everyone. This is Chapter 1 of Foundations of Teaching English Language Learners by Wayne E. Wright. So we're focused today on the topic of who are our English language learners. So this is a very important topic because we need to get to know our students first. There's so much to learn about English learners culturally and linguistically. So let's get started. We are going to use some guiding questions to review this information and discuss. So our first guiding question today is, what kinds of diversity do we find within the category of English language learners? So English language learners, or ELLs, which is an acronym you'll see used widely, are students who are in the process of attaining proficiency in English as a new or additional language. So we'll be talking a lot about home languages today, and our students come with very different linguistic backgrounds. They may be coming with one home language, two, three, sometimes four home languages. So we don't want to limit our students by saying that they only will be learning English as a second language. So you'll see within our field, we're moving away from ESL, English as a second language, as an acronym, because we want to be true to our students' stories and observe that they're learning English as a new language. It may be their third or fourth or fifth language that they're learning. So despite this unifying label of ELL, our students are from extremely diverse backgrounds. They come from different races, ethnicities, varying home languages, level of schooling in their previous experience, different socioeconomic statuses. And then when we think about our parents, they come from varying levels of education, of formal schooling. They have varying levels of English proficiency themselves, and also literacy in their home language. So they may be coming from refugee camps where they had limited to no formal schooling, so limited reading and writing literacy abilities in their home language. That all impacts the way our students learn in our schools. So many ELLs are actually born in the United States, but you'll see that students have varying levels of English being spoken at home. So that impacts the way they show up to our schools. So identification for ESL services begins whenever the student indicates, or the family indicates in their enrollment packet, that they speak a language other than English. So if a student does not speak a language other than English at home, so if a student is speaking another language at home, he or she is given a screening test for English language services, and we're measuring their English language proficiency. So within the state of Pennsylvania, we use the governing body of WIDA. So this WIDA gives us our standards, it gives us our screening for new students, and it also gives us our yearly test that we give to students for English language proficiency. So, for instance, I just screened a student today for English language proficiency using the WIDA screener online. So here's an example of the score sheet that an ESL teacher or a family liaison would be able to share with the teachers that explains what the student is able to do in English. So you'll see on the right hand side this score report. It has listening 4.0, speaking 2.0, reading 3.0, and writing 3.0. We use a rubric to explain what those mean, what those scores mean. So if you look to the image on your left, you'll see we start at the bottom. Entering level is 1. So that means that students have very, very limited English proficiency, maybe no spoken or written or reading in English whatsoever. That chart or rubric goes all the way up to 6, which is native like English proficiency. So we'll be reviewing this rubric more in the future. So just to give you an insight, the student score report on the right, this fourth grader, this fifth grader, this student is scoring an overall of a 3.0. Based on that score, they're about in the intermediate range. We call that developing. So the student is able to use simple and expanded sentences to show emerging complexity, used to provide detail. They're also using general and some specific language related to the content area. They may be really needing to work on vocabulary development. And then they're generally comprehensible when writing in sentences, although comprehensibility may be from time to time impeded with errors. So that just gives you an idea of where they might be if they're about 3.0 on this rubric. We would call them an intermediate student. And depending on the school's instructional model, the ESL teacher may go into the classroom to support this student. They may also pull this student out for additional support. So you'll see that within WIDA, we break down the language domains of writing, reading, speaking, and listening. So each year our students are focused on those 4 domains of language and growing those domains. We measure their proficiency and their growth each year using the WIDA Access 2.0. And that test gives us a score report for each individual student so that we're able to see what progress they make from year to year. So whenever we receive our students, we know that they come from varying backgrounds. So let's talk about 2 of the most important that our students will fall into. So students may come to us with limited or interrupted formal schooling. So we call these students SIFE students or SLIFE students, depending on what acronym your district may use. So many ELLs come with limited access to education, mainly because they've experienced disruptions in their home countries. So maybe they're in a refugee camp, maybe they're fleeing war. They may be physically distant from school and having to walk miles through mountainous regions or difficult terrain to get to school. So our students may not be a typical student as you would imagine in the United States, that they've entered in kindergarten and moved through elementary, middle, and high school. So as I said previously, many of our parents also have had limited opportunities for schooling in their home country as well. So that is not all of our students. On the other hand, we do have students that come to us with adequate or very strong formal schooling. So these students would be coming from stable political and economic situations in their countries where they do have access to high quality education. And in the same way, their parents come from very highly educated backgrounds. And so we know from research that if a student has strong language and literacy abilities in their home language, they're able to transfer that knowledge and those skills into learning their new language of English. So you can imagine the differences that come up based on the level of schooling that our students come to our schools with. So when we think about English teachers in school, ELL teachers, you may hear ESL teachers. Our teachers are typically assigned ESL teachers who will either pull them out of their classrooms during the English language arts block to work with the students in small groups. They may go into the classroom, we call that push-in model, to support the students within the classroom. So they would be working or co-teaching alongside of the English language arts teacher. Depending on how the school sets up their schedule, it really will lend to different models. So if it corresponds to scheduling and the ESL teacher is able to pull versus push in, it really works for students whenever they are newcomers entering level, that 1.0. of English development to be pulling the students in smaller groups so that they're getting more one-on-one or small group instruction versus as they're getting into the higher levels, those developing 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, the teacher will most likely push into the classroom and allow the student to be accessing the mainstream content of that ELA class. So in our schools, we have to see our English learners as our students in total. So not just the ESL teachers, students, but all teachers are to really pay attention to our English learners and try to meet their linguistic and academic needs. So our class here, ESL 501, our whole focus is to gain foundational knowledge and skills that we need to work effectively with our English learners and collaborate with colleagues in our buildings and within the community as well. So that's our whole focus of the class, which is very exciting. So when we think about educational opportunities for our English learners, they are entitled through law to equal access to education. So we are to be giving them high quality language instruction to develop their proficiency in English, and also give them high quality academic instruction across the content areas, math, science, social studies, just to name a few. So both types of instruction are needed for ELLs to be successful in school and when they leave us and go out into the world to work for further education. Greater opportunities for success are provided by our schools when we can also help students develop and maintain their proficiency in their home language. So you'll see that there are native Spanish speakers who are inherited language programs, for instance. Those programs are developing their Spanish literacy, so they all are able to speak and listen, but maybe they've had limited access to reading and writing in Spanish. So we did talk a little bit about instructional design and the way that we model teaching and learning for our English learners within the K-12 setting. So our instructional models focus on how we as teachers can view our English learners and organize teaching and learning within our the structure of our program in our school and our district. We want to make sure that we're really focusing on a pluralistic discourse or a multilingual discourse that recognizes the student's home language and culture as a rich resource for helping ELLs to learn new information. So our students come with a lot of background knowledge, potentially just totally different experiences than our native English speakers. So how can we draw on their experiences and their first language as an asset? We want to stay far, far away from this assimilationist discourse, which devalues our students' home language and culture and sees them as a problem. So we have to be really careful about the language that we use when we talk about English learners. We never want to say, oh, it's so much work, or, oh, these students don't know anything, or, oh, these students are illiterate. We cannot talk about our students that way. It really is very, very harmful. So it starts with us as individuals and the way that we talk about our students. Our perspectives do matter. So if we value our students' home languages and draw on them as resources, we're going to see our students be more engaged and very thankful and happy to be in school, as you'll see many of the students truly are. We're going to build that as our community within the school. And it also helps our teachers with how to approach the student, what methods to use, what strategies to use. And our course is going to be focused on this pluralistic perspective of English learners. So we talked about identifying students when they first come into the program based on their English proficiency when they enter. Students who have a lot of formal schooling, they may be able to exit the program in 2 to 5 years, for instance. This is called redesignation or exiting or reclassifying an English learner. So you'll hear all of those terms in the field. And the process of redesignation is determined when an ELL has gained enough proficiency in English to be exited. And this means that the student no longer receives specialized language and content instruction or support, and that means that they're ready to be in the mainstream classroom. So within Pennsylvania, we use two measures for this. We look at the WIDA Access 2.0 for ELLs, that test that I mentioned earlier that we use every year to measure proficiency. And we also use language use inventories. And that is a rubric that the ESL teacher and also the content area teacher fills out and provides feedback of observational data of the students in the classroom. So you may see in your schools that a student has a different language other than English on their enrollment packet or in their system. So in Pittsburgh Public Schools, for instance, we use eSchools. And the student may have exited from ESL services. So that would be written down in a student summary. You would be able to pull scores to look in the case that you were wondering. Okay, so our next guiding question is, what are the pros and cons of different labels for English language learners? So when we're labeling ELLs, you'll see that there are a lot of different names out there. We talked about ELL, English Language Learner. A shorter version of that is ELL. You'll probably hear me say ELL more often. That's something that I'm used to using. And then there's also Limited English Proficient, LEP. So we try to stay away from this term. This was used in education policy during No Child Left Behind. We don't want to focus on the limited English proficiency. That limited part is kind of derogatory in a sense that the student is coming without something. So we've wiped that L away. ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, uses L, English Learner, in their policy. Also, the ELL label has more positive focus. It portrays students as actively learning English. There are many additional labels you'll see in the text that they talk about emergent bilingual. That means that the student is drawing on both their home language and English as a new language. So they're developing both languages. Also, you'll see multilingual learner, and that is capturing a broad range of students who are learning through in more than one language. You'll also see culturally and linguistically diverse students to refer to the combination of ethnic and linguistic minority students. More terms, dual language learner is now commonly referred to children between the ages of 0 and 8 who have at least one parent who speaks a language other than English at home. So interestingly, MPI estimates that 1/3 of our students in the US are dual language learners. And I mentioned heritage language learner previously. So this means that students are coming from a home where English is not the primary language. And as a group, they're learning a wide variety of linguistic and cultural expertise that we can really build on as educators. And some students may be highly bilingual and biliterate, and some will have higher oral proficiency in their first language, but limited literacy. So not able to read or write yet. So a big question is, why do we care about labels? So we as educators are encouraged to look critically at the way that language learners are described and evaluated in our schools and our communities, as well as in the greater society and media, because there are a lot of implications for the way that we label English learners. Our next question is, where do we find English language learners in the United States in the past and today? So another interesting fact is that a little more than 1 in 4 children are immigrants in the United States. So a common misconception is that most children of immigrants are foreign born. Also in the text, they use this term that they are illegal aliens. I'm sure you've heard that in your time. In reality, 88% of children are born in the US. So they are US citizens. So, of course, if you were to hear illegal alien in a school, you would say, we've updated those terms in the kindest way you could to your colleague, and share this information. Almost 90% of children of immigrants are born in the US, so they are US citizens. Only about 1/3 of children of immigrants are classified as ELLs. So that means that our students come with enough English proficiency when they start kindergarten to not need services. So they would be scoring at that 5.0, 6.0 level and would not qualify for English language services. So nationally, ELLs make up about 10% of our overall student population. I was just in a meeting last night hearing from some suburban districts and some districts that are outliers outside of the city that they are at this number, 10%. So their numbers are growing just as much as urban populations. I pulled some data from MPI, the Migration Policy Institute, just to share a little bit of the demographics with you. So about 7.2% of students are foreign born, and you can see here the regions that they're born in and how many students approximately are living in the US. I also wanted to share this data here with you, that our largest states that have English learners are Texas, California, and New Mexico, and they're around 20% of their total population are English learners. So as you can see, Pennsylvania is not on this list. Our next guiding question is, why do teachers need to know specific information about their English language learners' home languages and literacies, English language proficiency, educational histories, and sociocultural experiences? So we need to know background information about our students. Although it's not mandated for us to collect data based on the students' prior schooling, we as English teachers should have this information to address the needs of our diverse students. So we really do need to know the students' home language, about their family, their cultural background, and that's going to be built by having relationships with our students, knowing them, knowing their stories, having them be comfortable with us as educators. This table from the text is very helpful. There are many different names for English learners, as you can see, and the description of these is very helpful. So we have native US ELLs, we have foreign-born ELLs, we have indigenous ELLs, we have transnational ELLs. Newcomer ELLs, we talk a lot about newcomers who have been in the US for 1 to 2 years. We have highly schooled newcomer ELLs and refugee ELLs. Also, we'll be talking a lot about long-term ELLs, so students who have been in the ESL program or have remained in English language services for 5 years or more. We'll also be covering special education ELLs, so those students who are dually identified as having a learning or cognitive need, and also language services. Additionally, gifted and talented ELLs, and then reclassified ELLs. So we did talk about those students who would have tested out of ESL and had those language use inventories filled out by the teachers to say they are ready for the mainstream classroom. So our US Census does collect data on languages spoken, and there are approximately 350 different languages spoken within the United States. So within Pittsburgh Public Schools, we have approximately 60 different languages spoken. Following English, Spanish is the second most common language, and Spanish speakers are over 3.7 million, and they make up about 80% of the English language population in the US. So here are the top 20 languages I pulled for you that are spoken by K-12 students in the United States. So you'll see Spanish is at the top, Arabic, Chinese, those are the top three. Within Pittsburgh Public Schools, we have a large population of Spanish speakers, Arabic speakers, Nepali speakers, Swahili speakers, and also our new students who are arriving from Ukraine, as well as Afghanistan, who speak Pashto and Dari. So when we think about the diversity of Spanish speakers, this group is a large group coming from many different countries in the world. So it is an international language, and there are 442 million people that speak this language. So you can imagine the diversity of backgrounds that the students are coming from who are Spanish speakers. So actually, I think it's interesting that the US is one of the top 5 Spanish speaking countries in the world. So it's important to recognize that although ELLs come from Spanish-speaking country, their home language might not be Spanish. There are many students who come from indigenous groups who speak unique languages and have unique culture. So we can't just give a generalization of the student is from Guatemala, thus they speak Spanish. They may speak an indigenous language that would be shared during the enrollment. So we need to be aware of the great linguistic diversity that is masked by the label Asian. So students come from 21 different Asian countries, and there are hundreds of languages spoken. In the same way, Black immigrant students who come from Africa and the Caribbean also have a great diversity of linguistic and cultural backgrounds. So super diversity has emphasized that there is diversity within diversity, and we have to focus on the many factors that play a part, including race, culture, language, ethnicity, education level, migration history, and socioeconomic status. So students may have a wide variety of oral language proficiency and literacy skills in their home language. Many ELLs speak a variety of their home language that is varying from the standard variety. ELLs typically have literacy skills in their home language only if they've had the opportunity to learn to read and write them in their home country. Our next guiding question is, how can teachers learn about their English language learners' backgrounds? So we need to know the following about each student as teachers. What languages and literacies are used at home? What is their English language proficiency level? What is their education history in their home country as well as the US? How long have they been in the US? What was their reason for immigration? What are their siblings like? Are they in school? And also, what is the background of their family's educational history and their family's proficiency in English and other languages? So many of our students are ethnic minorities that come from low-income families. So historically, as you know, our US education system has done an inadequate job serving these families who have difficulty due to their socioeconomic status. So we need to provide equitable education opportunities to our poor and minority students. So estimates suggest that over 60% of ELLs come from low-income families. And according to MPI, 45% of limited English proficient adults lack a high school diploma. So only 15% of limited English proficient adults have a college degree compared to 32% of English proficient adults who do have a college degree. So thinking about varying educational levels as well is going to have huge impact on what kind of jobs our English learners will be able to have as they grow up and leave the K-12 setting. So by the time No Child Left Behind came to an end, most states in the US failed to meet their achievement targets for ELLs in learning and attaining English, especially when considering the state mandated testing in reading and math. So dropout rates continue to be substantially higher for Latinx students than for white students. You can see some of this data here about Latinx students. Graduation rate was 78% compared to white students, which was 88%. Graduation rates are even lower for Native American students and African American students. Graduation rate was the highest for Asian and Pacific Island students at 90%, but this data can be misleading and also feeds into the Asian American model minority myth that we'll talk about that suggests that Asian American students do well academically and that thus Asian American families do well economically. So this myth has been widely criticized for masking educational and linguistic needs of our Asian American students, particularly those that are English learners. So when we look at our Asian American students who are struggling in school, many of those students live in poverty and face a lot of discrimination. So newcomer students that are Karen, Karenni, Chin, and other refugee students from Myanmar or Burma, along with Bhutanese newcomer students arriving from Nepal, face substantial linguistic and academic needs. So those groups that I just mentioned, we have a large population of those students in Pittsburgh Public Schools. Specifically, our Bhutanese newcomer students have settled and lived in Carrick. So if you're familiar with Concord, South Hills, and Brashear, that is the majority of where our students live from the Bhutanese Nepali group. Also, when we think about the Asian American model minority myth, we give little attention to the fact that sub-Saharan African students have the highest rates of educational attainment compared to other immigrant groups. So incredible data. But as long as this myth about Asian American achievement exists, we have to take care of our specific students, our specific African immigrant ELLs, and not just mask this broad brush accolade of success. So we really need to look at our students on an individual basis. How are they doing? How are they obtaining their language and literacy skills? Also, how are they fitting in socially? Are they making friends? Are they happy in school? So we're seeing a lot of changes in school demographics and trends as the world changes, and we're receiving new groups of students. So we're seeing a lot of students from the Middle East, Asia, and African countries, including Afghanistan, Bhutan, Burma or Myanmar, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, Liberia, Rwanda, Somalia, Sudan, and Syria. Many of these students are refugee students, and they've experienced trauma and thus have also had interrupted formal schooling due to war. Many were subjected to discrimination and have been denied equal access to education in their home countries. So some of our students may be entering school for the first time. They may have never been able to attend school. Others may have had disruption in their education because of war or being in refugee camps. So our academic underachievement is best understood through the principle of opportunity to learn. So we want to give our students the opportunities that all students in the US have to learn. We don't want our students to be limited based on funding, based on resources, but that tends to be the way it happens, that poor and minority students are segregated in overcrowded or underfunded schools. Also, we have to know that the US Commission of Human Rights report states that low-income students and students of color are also typically regulated to low-quality facilities with teachers who have less experience than established mentor teachers. So, although we have limited resources and challenges with students learning English, we can focus on students learning and reaching the highest levels of academic achievement. As educators, we have to focus on creating policies, designing programs, and making instructional decisions that meet the needs of our students. We should be building on strengths that ELLs bring to our schools and the home languages and funds of knowledge that they bring to us. So I love the term funds of knowledge. We use it a lot in this field. It refers to the body of knowledge, cultural artifacts, and cultural resources that are present in students' homes and communities and can be drawn on for a basis of learning. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you listening, reading, and learning. I am excited. In our next class, we're going to be talking about culturally inclusive instruction and also ELLs in special education. If you have any questions about what you heard today, what you saw, what you read, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Thank you so much.